When Brielle, just 16 years old, rose from her seat in the bustling cafeteria of Roosevelt High, she wasn't just defending herself against a careless insult. She was about to ignite something much bigger. The words that left Jason's mouth would soon ripple through the room, but not in the way he had imagined. What was supposed to be an embarrassing moment for her would turn into a reckoning none of them would ever forget. The lunchtime rush at the high school was a constant tide of chatter and movement. Voices clashed, food trays clattered, and the space hummed with teenage energy. The cafeteria was divided, a mosaic of groups scattered like islands. Athletes occupied one corner, theater kids claimed another, and everyone else had their own nook where they found comfort in the familiar. In this storm of voices and laughter, Brielle sat near the window, her braids framing her face as sunlight filtered through. This corner was her sanctuary, quiet, but not entirely invisible. Being one of the few black students in a predominantly white school, Brielle had learned early that standing out often invited discomfort. Her confidence was frequently misinterpreted as arrogance, her laughter too loud, her very presence an unwelcome disruption. But today, she sat there, with her warm brown eyes scanning the room, letting the soft murmur of conversation wash over her as she opened her lunch, homemade jambalaya, the warmth of it rising from the container. She felt a moment of calm, letting the simple view of the school's courtyard stretch before her eyes, where the trees swayed gently in the crisp fall air. She had perfected the art of fading into the background, of not giving anyone a reason to notice her. Peace, however, was fleeting. The storm was coming, and it started with the unmistakable, sharp edge of a voice cutting through the chatter. Brielle had felt it before, the sting of whispers behind her back. A group of juniors, led by Jason, were huddled at a table not far from hers, their laughter a little too loud, a little too pointed. She didn't need to look over her shoulder to know what they were talking about. Brielle's dark, Jason's voice rang out, deliberately loud, slicing through the noise. You'd think she'd get it by now. Brielle's breath caught in her throat. For a brief moment, her fork hovered in midair, her heart racing. But she didn't flinch. She set it down slowly, careful not to betray the hurt that stung her chest. Her eyes caught Jason's, that smug grin of his, and Mia's barely contained snicker beside him. A few others shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking away, but no one spoke up. The room seemed to shift, as if the very air had thickened. Brielle's mind raced, but her face remained calm. She had learned to weather these moments, to swallow the hurt, to let it pass, and pretend nothing had changed. But today was different. This time, Jason wasn't just speaking to her, he was aiming for something deeper. A reaction. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, his challenge in the air like a dare. What's wrong? He taunted, a smirk playing on his lips. No comeback? Nothing to say? The cafeteria grew quieter, the buzz of conversation turning into a hushed anticipation. All eyes turned toward Brielle, their curiosity palpable. She could feel them all, some amused, some unsure, but none of them offering support. Brielle's grip on her fork tightened, her heart pounding in her chest. This was her moment. She could ignore it, let it pass, or she could stand up and speak out. Jason leaned in, his voice dripping with mockery. What's the matter, Brielle? Cat got your tongue? Someone from his table muttered, Jason, stop, but it was a weak plea, one that barely registered. Jason wasn't listening. He was enjoying this too much. With slow, deliberate movements, Brielle set her fork down and pushed her lunch aside. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the tile, an unmistakable sign that something was about to shift. The silence that followed felt suffocating. All eyes were locked on her now, but her gaze was fixed solely on Jason. Honest, she repeated, her voice a calm yet cutting edge. You call that honesty? Jason laughed, but it was hollow, forced. Yeah, someone had to say it. The murmurs of the room grew louder, whispers rippling through the crowd. Brielle took a step closer to Jason's table, her stance unyielding. The room seemed to shrink as her words started to fill the space between them. You think you're brave, standing there with your little group, thinking you can tear someone down to make yourself feel bigger? Is that it? Jason's confident smirk faltered, confusion and discomfort flashing across his face. What are you talking about? Oh, I'm sorry, Brielle's voice was cool, biting. Did I use too many big words for you? Let me make it simple, you're insecure. And instead of dealing with your own issues, you try to break people like me. But guess what? You're not special. The cafeteria was dead silent now. Even the lunch monitors, usually so detached from the drama, were watching. Jason, once so cocky, was shrinking under the weight of her words. You think it's funny, huh? Brielle's voice rose slightly, her words gaining strength. Making jokes about my skin as if I don't already know what you think of me. As if I haven't heard it 100 times before, from people just like you. Jason opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. He looked around at his friends, seeking support, but none of them met his eyes. Brielle wasn't done yet. This was her moment to turn the tide. She took another step closer, the tension in the room thick and electric. She tilted her head slightly, a small, knowing smile on her lips. You know what's funny, Jason? Her tone shifted, sharp and unwavering. How you can sit there, so sure of yourself, thinking your words have power over me. But here's the thing you don't understand, my skin, this skin you mock, is beautiful. It carries history, strength, and resilience. You don't get to decide what it means to me. And you sure as hell don't get to make me feel ashamed of it. Jason's face flushed, his earlier bravado crumbling as the silence in the cafeteria deepened. Brielle's words weren't just aimed at him, they were for everyone who had ever stayed quiet in the face of cruelty. You make fun of me because I'm different, she continued, her voice steady, her words powerful. But you know what? I see someone who's scared of what they don't understand. Someone so desperate for attention that they'll tear someone else down to feel bigger. That's not strength, Jason. That's weakness. A murmur swept through the room. A few students subtly nodded, their expressions shifting. Jason glanced around, realizing the tide was turning, but it was too late. Brielle had already taken control of the room. She stepped even closer to Jason, her voice now carrying across the cafeteria. Let me ask you this, she said, her words cutting deep. What exactly do you gain by trying to humiliate me? Does it make you feel better about yourself? Does it fix whatever's missing in your life? Jason stammered, trying to backpedal. I didn't mean it like that. Brielle's response was immediate, sharp. You knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted to make me feel small. But guess what? It didn't work. It never will. The room was captivated, every eye locked on her. Brielle's confidence was magnetic, her words slicing through the tension like a hot knife through butter. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in a calm, undeniable certainty. And here's the thing, Jason, Brielle said, her voice softening just enough to make the next words even more powerful, you don't get to write my story. I do. And in my story, I'm not the victim. I'm the hero. I stand up, I speak out, and I make people like you realize just how small your words really are. For a moment, the cafeteria stood frozen in time. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and palpable. Then, slowly, a few students started clapping. It began hesitantly, but it grew, louder, more confident. The applause spread like wildfire across the room. Brielle didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood tall, her gaze steady, her heart steady. Jason, on the other hand, shrank in his seat, the last of his confidence gone. Mia glanced at him, her face unreadable, then back at Brielle. Brielle wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever felt small, overlooked, or unwanted. The applause continued to grow, echoing through the cafeteria. It wasn't the entire room, but it was enough. Enough to make a statement. Brielle didn't need validation, but in that moment, she had it. The cafeteria was alive with the usual noise, but for Brielle, it felt like the air had thickened, the weight of what had just transpired hanging over every corner. She could practically feel the ground trying to swallow her whole, her face flushed with embarrassment. Even Mia, who had found amusement moments ago, now shifted in her seat, her eyes avoiding Brielle's gaze as if the very act of making eye contact could expose something unspoken. As Brielle turned back toward her table, trying to recompose herself, a voice broke through the murmur of the room. "You're amazing, Brielle." It was a voice she didn't recognize, but it came from a table she had never expected to hear anything from, a group of quieter students, the ones who usually kept to themselves, the ones who blended into the background. The words caught her off guard, and for a moment, her lips curved into a smile. Not a smile of victory, but a smile born of gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment. But she didn't let herself linger in that fleeting feeling. The atmosphere was shifting around her, and she knew it was time to move forward. The buzz in the cafeteria began to resume, conversations picking up again, though with a softer tone, as if everyone had taken a collective breath. Laughter returned, forks clinked against plates, but the air had changed. There was a new layer of tension, an undercurrent of something more, something unspoken. Brielle's stand had sent a ripple through the room, a reminder that sometimes silence wasn't the best choice. But Jason wasn't ready to let it go. As Brielle passed by his table, he muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear, just loud enough to still sting. "Drama queen," he scoffed, his voice thick with derision. Brielle stopped in her tracks, the words lingering in the air like smoke. She turned back to face him, but this time, her expression wasn't filled with anger or defiance, it was something else. Something more powerful. It was pity. "If standing up for myself makes me a drama queen," she said, her voice calm, controlled, "then I'll wear the crown. You should try it sometime. It's better than hiding behind insults." Jason didn't respond. His eyes dropped to his plate, his friends shifting awkwardly in their seats, their discomfort palpable. It wasn't long before Mia grabbed her tray, muttering something about needing to get to class early. One by one, Jason's friends scattered, leaving him sitting alone, his earlier bravado fading into the background. Brielle returned to her seat, picking up her fork, resuming her meal as if nothing had happened. But inside, her hands trembled ever so slightly, adrenaline still coursing through her, the rush of the moment catching up with her, but she refused to show it. She wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. A few students passed her table, offering quiet words of thanks or a simple nod of support. One girl whispered, "You said what all of us have been too scared to say." Brielle's response was a soft thank you, but her thoughts weren't on the compliments. Her mind was racing. Would Jason think twice before speaking again, or would he simply find someone else to target? The thought tightened her chest, but she pushed it away. She had done what she could. The true impact of her words wouldn't be fully realized until later, when the whispers that began in the cafeteria would transform into real conversations, conversations that had long been avoided. By the next day, Brielle's confrontation had spread like wildfire. The cafeteria scene was retold with every slight embellishment, growing larger with each retelling. "Did you hear what Brielle said to Jason? She totally shut him down. I didn't know she had it in her." The story was everywhere, on every hallway, in every classroom. Some praised her for her bravery, while others dismissed it as an overreaction, just another example of high school drama. But Brielle? She didn't let it get to her. She carried on as if nothing had changed. She walked through the halls with her head high, greeting the familiar faces around her and ignoring the curious stares from those who had made it their business to watch her every move. She wasn't going to feed the frenzy, not now, not ever. But then something remarkable happened. During her English class, a boy raised his hand, and in the midst of the discussion, he asked, "Why do you think people feel the need to tear others down? Is it jealousy, or something deeper?" The teacher, surprised but intrigued, guided the class into a deeper discussion about prejudice, insecurity, and the reasons behind hurtful behavior. Brielle stayed quiet, observing as her classmates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some speaking with passion, others unable to meet anyone's eye. It was clear, the conversation was different now. It was no longer just about Brielle, it was about something much bigger. Later that day, during lunch, Brielle noticed Jason sitting alone at his usual table, his friends nowhere to be found. They had likely distanced themselves, perhaps too uncomfortable with what had unfolded the day before. Brielle felt a flicker of pity for him. But it was short-lived. The consequences of his actions had caught up with him. This was a moment for him to reflect on the damage words could do. Whether he chose to learn from it, that was his choice. But the real surprise came later that week, when Mia approached her at her locker. Mia, of all people. Brielle didn't know how to react when she saw her. Mia's nervous energy was obvious, her fingers twisting the strap of her backpack as she hesitated. "Hey, Brielle," she said quietly, her voice almost drowned out by the noise around them. Brielle raised an eyebrow but kept her tone neutral. "What's up?" Mia looked down at the ground for a moment before blurting out, I wanted to say I'm sorry for laughing, for not stopping him. I guess I thought. I don't know what I thought, but it wasn't right." For a moment, Brielle didn't know what to say. Apologies like this weren't common, especially not from someone who had been on the sidelines. She studied Mia's face, searching for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was guilt, raw, real guilt. "Thank you," Brielle said softly, the sincerity of Mia's apology not lost on her. "It means something that you came to me and said that." Mia nodded, looking relieved. "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. I didn't say anything because, well, I was scared. But that's not an excuse." Brielle smiled faintly. "It's not. But recognizing it is a start." Mia nodded again, then walked away, leaving Brielle with a complex mix of emotions. She hadn't expected Mia, Jason's closest ally, to come to her with an apology. But here they were, one small step toward something better. It was progress, no matter how small. As the week wore on, the incident continued to evolve. Teachers began addressing issues of respect and inclusivity in their classrooms, weaving these important discussions into their lessons, encouraging students to share their thoughts. The principal even made an announcement over the intercom, reminding everyone that Roosevelt High prided itself on being a community that valued kindness and understanding. Brielle knew that life wouldn't magically become easier, but there was a shift. The occasional stares and whispered comments were still there, but they felt different now. There was a subtle change in the air. She walked through the halls with a little more confidence, feeling less like an outsider and more like someone whose voice had been heard. Jason, on the other hand, had faded into the background. His usual cocky swagger was gone, replaced by a demeanor that was almost unrecognizable. He avoided Brielle whenever their paths crossed, and while he never apologized, his silence spoke louder than words ever could.